Yep. Good morning, everyone. So last session we discussed about JavaScript Ajax options, how to handle the JavaScript Ajax features. So yesterday we learned about how JavaScript Ajax is used, because actually Ajax means people generally do that from jQuery or other libraries. So in reality also, majority of applications use jQuery onwards. From jQuery they use Ajax. But if you are building a library for front-end applications, then in such cases you need JavaScript Ajax. And yesterday we learned how Ajax requests are made. JavaScript Ajax is managed by XML HTTP. So XML HTTP request object, and we discussed about all the features about them. So we discussed what are the properties, methods, and how Ajax request is made. I will give one small example here. So in the last session, the example we created is, so the last session example was working with Ajax and sending. Here we can see in this example, we sent a HTML response. The response is in the form of text. So you can have a simple HTML response. So that HTML response we are sending. So it is going to fetch that file, and it is going to display that file here. So this is actually the concept of so how the request is managed asynchronously. That means without posting the entire page, the new details are added into the page. Now, generally, the Ajax response, today we will see some other points actual. So today we will see, suppose response headers, response type. You saw we have a response type. So an HTML or response, or it is a simple text response. So HTML or simple text response, we were able to do that. So I will show one more example here. In this example, just previously, we have that XML HTTP request for some files. We are having some files. So we are using the response text of HTTP. So I will create a simple example here. So first one is, suppose there is some data. I will create a new folder called Ajax. Okay. And in that there is a file here, index.html. This is the page. So let's keep this as Ajax. So now I am configuring some data here. There is data folder. In that we will create a new file, some help.txt. It's a text document. So here Ajax help. So here we have some asynchronous JavaScript and XML, and XML HTTP request object for Ajax. So these are some options are there in a text document. Now what we want to do is say help and horizontal line some size, and here we will put some div with a ID as container. So into the div we want to display the content. So we need to access the data from a text document, and we need to display inside the container. So we need to read the data from a file and do that. So then how we manage that? We are defining on click. So that is a help click. On help click, we are writing a script, and the function is help click. On help click, we need to make an AJAX call. So we are creating a HTTP object. It is of type XML HTTP request. So XML HTTP, so request object. And this XML HTTP request object, so we'll make a AJAX call. How we make the AJAX call? So we have to use http.open. So http.open, so the method is get. We are fetching the data, the method is get. URL is, it is coming from /data/help.txt. We are accessing that here. After that, HTTP will send the response. Now, what we need to do? So we need to configure HTTP on, so ready state change is equal to, it's a callback function. And what is the function here is, it should collect the data and display. That means whatever data is there, you need to access that and display. So document dot get element by ID. So ID here we need, already I told you status. So we have to define if HTTP dot, so status. So status is, we can define status or we can say ready state. Ready state is equal to 4. 4 means the response is fulfilled. Yesterday I explained all the methods, ready state related options. We have ready state 0, 1, 2, 3 and all. Now here HTTP ready state 4, and on ready state 4, what should happen here is usually, so we will access document dot get element by ID. So that is container. In container inner HTML, we are displaying HTTP dot. So we have response text. We have response text. Response text is used when your response is a HTML or when your response is an ordinary HTML format or text. If it is a text or HTML format, we need to do that. So this is a simple AJAX request created to manage this. Now let's run this and see here. You can see when I click on that help, so that help have to get the document and display here. What we will do is we will make this into a actually pre is pre-formatted. So we will make it into a container, then it will display like this. As it is in the file. So how it is mentioned in the file, in the same way it is going to display. So this is actually making an AJAX call through JavaScript, and we are requesting the data from a file, fetching the data and loading the data into our page without reloading the complete page. So the complete page is not reloaded, only this port is updated. That's what generally how AJAX happens. Now this is, so the response text. So what we have to do is HTML response or text response is managed by the XML HTTP request object. Request object have an property called response text. This response text is used for dealing with HTML response or text response. If you are dealing with HTML or text response, then response text is enough, right? Now the question is how you will manage a JSON response or XML response. Generally response type, so from the client, whenever a request is made, the response will be in various. Actually, it can be a JSON response, it can be an XML response, so or it can be a text. Text you have seen how to handle it. I will give an example here. So I will copy this example. This is plain text or HTML response. So you are making a request and it is sending the response in the form of plain text. It is sending that. Now the question here is, from server side, the response can be in XML or it can be in JSON type. So why we are expecting this kind of responses? Actually, for that you need to understand it is not a part of front end. Actually, it is a backend concept. You need to know server side technologies, but I am explaining the scenario in the projects, how we need to handle the data coming from the backend. So usually in JavaScript, to understand that, you need to know one format option, like why we need JSON and XML. For that, you need to understand distributed computing architecture. To understand the concept of AJAX, to use various formats of data, so how to consume the data and present the data in our front end. For that, you need to know the concept of distributed computing. Actually, what is distributed computing is, so it's a server side concept. I'm just giving an idea to you so that you can understand, because we are not learning any server side here. So, but you need to know how to interact with the server data which is coming. So I am giving an overview of that. So generally distributed computing is nothing but, so distributed computing allows two different applications running on two different machines to share information. Distributed computing allows two different applications running on two different machines to share information. Actually, not only that, so it also allows two different applications running on same machine. So on two different running on same machine on two different process to share information. That is what actually distributed computing is. Generally, AJAX is used majority in this distributed architecture. So we use AJAX calls, we use AJAX request mostly in a distributed computing environment. Distributed computing means, so two different applications running on two different machines can share information, or two different applications running on same machine in two different process also can share information. For example, you see here, means what is the point about it is, actually we have two different applications. That means two computers are there. So actually one is a server machine. So we have a server machine, and we have a client machine. We have client. Actually, this server is called, so we call this as provider, and this client is called consumer. Now, generally, we have an application on server. On server, we have an app. We usually have an application on server, and we have an application on. So we have an application on server, and we have an application on client. That means two applications will be there. One application on server, another application on client. Now, what happens is the client application can connect with the server application and can share information. Server application can share information with client. For example, the best example is, suppose you are using Netflix or Amazon or some Flipkart or some Zomato or Swiggy, like apps on your mobile. Actually, here you see I'm using Netflix. This is Netflix. I'm accessing this Netflix in a browser. So I'm accessing, this is Netflix, right? This is not Netflix, banner, Netflix. Okay. I'm accessing Netflix in my computer. I'm accessing this Netflix in my browser. When I'm accessing Netflix on my browser, I can open the movies. I can watch the movies on my browser. But actually, instead of accessing on a browser, so we have, instead of accessing on a browser, we have, so Netflix is having, so we have a Netflix app in the device. So in my machine, I am having a Netflix app. That means I can open this Netflix app and I can watch movies here also. Then what is the difference between the browser and this app? So what is the difference between that? So the difference is nothing but, so actually this Netflix app that you are using to watch movies, so this is a distributed application. Distributed application will provide you so lot of information even offline also. That means you can download a video, you can watch the video offline. So it provides a lot of data cached for you. That means whenever you visit that, so some data will be opened for you without connecting to internet. But any latest things or any updates, it needs to connect with the server and access. So if you are using an application in your device which communicates with a server side application, then it is a distributed application. We have distributed applications. So usually distributed application is nothing but two applications running on two different machines can share information between them. That is one distributed. Another concept is that distributed computing is not only that, actually two applications running on same machine also can share information. Suppose we have another application. So two applications are present in client computer. That means, so this is some app 1 and this is some app 2. That means we have two applications here. So this is some app 1. Yeah. So this is app 1 and this is app 2. We have two applications here. So two applications are there. And actually these two applications are present on same machine. And these applications can share information between them. This is also distributed computing. So distributed computing allows two applications running on two different machines to share information. Or it allows two applications running on same machine to share information. For example, suppose you are using some bank application. So when you are using some bank application on your mobile or any device, that bank application sends an OTP and the OTP comes to your SMS. So you have a separate SMS app. To that SMS app, the OTP is received. Now, what bank application can do is it can even read that OTP from that SMS app and it can autofill that OTP. So that means on a same machine, two applications, which are different applications, are sharing information between them. So usually this happens regular concept. For example, you see you are watching some products in Amazon on your mobile. You are searching for some products, you are doing some shopping. After that, you go to YouTube or you go to Facebook or some other application, you will find that in that they will show you the advertisements related to the products you searched on Amazon. They will go show you small ad banners like that. That means the applications are sharing information between them. So two applications so running on the same machine are sharing information between them. So this is also a concept of distributed computing. So generally distributed computing allows to share information in this way. Actually, there are so many distributed computing architectures. Distributed computing architectures. Distributed computing architectures. So many are there architectures like we have Corba. So Corba is common request broken architecture, common object request broken architecture. We have like DCOM, distribute component object model, distribute component object model. So we have like RMI. RMI is remote method invocation, remote method invocation. We have like EJB. EJB is so enterprise Java beans, enterprise Java beans, right? So we have like web service. Web service is known for all technologies. We have like remoting. These are all distributed computing technologies. Web service is known for, actually every distributed computing technology is for different languages and platforms. Actually, Corba is used in almost 14 languages. DCOM is used in Visual Basic. RMI is used in Java. So EJB is used in J2EE. Web services are used in all, like Java knows web services, .NET knows web services, PHP knows web services, Python knows web services, all so technologies know web service. Remoting is for .NET. So there are so many distributed computing architectures. Different technologies use different distributed computing architectures actually. So these are distributed computing architectures available. These are the various distributed computing architecture technologies. I will show you a simple one here. Yeah. So these are, this is actually is the main definition of distributed computing. So it allows communication between applications running on different machines or same machine. So these are all distributed computing technologies, right? Corba, DCOM, RMI, EJB, web services, remoting. Actually, Corba is invented by OMG group. and it is used in 14 languages, including C++, Java. Like we have DCOM, distribute component object model. It is used in Visual Basic like language. We have RMI, remote method invocation. It is invented by Sun Microsystems and it is used in J2E. So we have EJB, enterprise Java beans. It is used in Java, invented by Sun Microsystems. So we have web service. It is used in all technologies. Almost all languages use this web service. Remoting is for .NET. These are all different distributed computing. Now, actually, the point is in this, how the communication happens, means how they communicate actually. So generally, web service specifications are there. Web service specifications. Specifications, actually 3 specifications are there. We have SOAP, we have REST, and we have JSON. There are the 3 specifications we are having. The SOAP and the REST and the JSON. Actually, what are the differences between SOAP, REST, and JSON? What is the difference between them? Actually, SOAP is usually SOAP is service oriented architecture. So architecture protocol. It is service oriented architecture protocol. Actually, in SOAP, consumer sends XML request, and provider sends XML response. The request and response will be in XML form. That is actually SOAP. These days we are not much depending on SOAP. So what we are doing is we are majority depending on. So another one is REST. REST is actually representational state transfer. Actual in REST, so consumer will sends a query request, and provider will send an XML response. Provider sends XML response. So request and response will be in this. And optionally the response can be in JSON also. So, but these days we are not even going with this REST type of technique. What we are doing is we are using the another format of request and response. That is actually we are using JSON type. We are using JSON. Usually JSON sends the request and response in JSON format. That means now we are going with majority JSON type. JSON is JavaScript object notation. So the consumer sends JSON request, and the provider sends JSON response. So request and response will be in JSON form. Request and response both are in JSON form. So the request is sent in JSON, the response will come in JSON. These days we are using the format JSON very much. So communicating in the form of JSON, we are using this very much. Actually, if you are dealing with the communication with APIs, JSON is lightweight. It is less verbose format actually, and JSON occupies less memory, and it is faster. It cannot be blocked by the firewalls. all these are important features why we are going with the JSON and working with the JSON response actually. So when we are making a request, the request so will seek the response from the server, and the server response can be a XML response, it can be a JSON response, or it can be a simple HTML response. So now the point is you need to know, so in JavaScript, how the various responses are handled. Means you make a request and it will send some response, how to handle this response. For that you have seen this XML HTTP request object. So JavaScript XML HTTP request object. So it is XML HTTP request object. This XML HTTP request object so can manage the response in various formats. That's what just now I showed you. So it will provides response text. It is used for both. So simple text, simple HTML, you can use it for JSON also. But for JSON, we need a parser which converts the data into JSON and returns the data in JSON form. So we need a parser actually. So if it is XML, we use response XML actually. It is used for XML here. So you make a request and wait for the response. And if response is coming in the format of XML, then you have to use response XML. If the response is coming in the form of text or HTML, then you have to go with response text. And if response is in a JSON format, then you have to use response text only. But that response text must be converted into JSON. We need to convert that into JSON. Let's see one simple concept, how we can handle these responses. Already one example is handling a response which is in text. And yesterday you saw the response is handled in HTML, right? HTML response, we are accessing and displaying it. So this is the text response. Suppose we have some JSON data. Let's see here, we are having some JSON data. In our data folder, so there is some products JSON. We have some JSON data. Now we need to handle the JSON data and we need to access the products JSON. Let's see here. I will create a button. So, and I say products, and this is JSON. So this is help and this is text. So on click here, so on click, so I will give as products click. Okay. And here we are writing products click. Okay. We are writing a function here, products click. And this products click have to use HTTP object. So we need to define send. Request is get, and the file is .data/products.json. That is the JSON. And sorry, this is http.open. We need to open that first. Yeah. And after that, we need http.send. And here we need to configure HTTP and on ready state. In we use a callback function here. This function will verify if http.ready state is equal to 4, that means fulfilled. Then what should happen? We will create a variable called data is equal to JSON.parse. It will convert the data into JSON and which data is coming. That means we will use the data. So http.response text. response text. We are accessing that response text and parsing that text into JSON. Now this data is in a JSON format, So what I will do is document get element by ID into the container dot inner HTML. We will display the data, whatever data is there. Actually, we are using JSON parse for converting the data into JSON format. So which is coming in text. It is in a JSON format. This products JSON have to convert that into JSON, and you can see data is having a collection of web objects. So this is actually collection of objects. That means this is a collection of objects because JSON is going to convert that data because it is an array. It returns an array. Now this data is an array. We want to present that array. So we want to present the array. That means what we will do is, so better we will take another container here. That means here below this, we will add a table. So table is having class table. This is just have an ID. This is have border and table is one. So table is having some, so width is some 300. Yeah. So T head and TR and TH. So we have the name and the price. Suppose we are accessing this and we have a table body. So T body. And what we need to do is, this is the data. Just for your understanding sake, first I will console.log the data so that you can see what it is. So I will go to the inspect and let's go to the console. And in the console, I click on products JSON. You can see the array of data is coming. And you know how to present this data. That's not a complex thing. Already we know that. So what we will do here is we will write a for where item of data. And this is so defining. So a tr, so document get create element tr. So we have td name document dot create element. So that is td, and we have td price. So this is document dot create element, that is also td, and we have so these two cells td name dot inner html. It has to get item dot name, and the td price dot inner html. It should get item dot price. And here we have tr dot append child. So it will append td name, and tr dot append child. It will append td price. So we are defining this. Now next important here, what you have to do is after configuring this, and we need to so add this into document dot query selector. So we will use query selector, and in the query selector we will add t body into that append child. This all we know how to create a dynamic table tr. That means whatever data is coming, the data will come and display here. This time we are not using fetch. So we are not using the fetch method which we learned already. So we are using a JavaScript AJAX method to communicate with the JSON type and access. It can be a and return the data. So in distributed applications, client request will be in the form of the client request will be in the form of various, depending on what distributed technology specification they are using. Is it SOAP? Is it REST? Or is it JSON? That depends on various types actually. So if it is a SOAP, then request and response is in XML form. If it is REST, then request is a query and response will be in XML. And if it is JSON, the request and response will be in JSON format. Actually, this is the process how we have to handle the AJAX call. So this is help text is going to get that, and products JSON is going to get this one and display. So actually, this kind of things we done by using fetch. Actually, fetch is a promise, and fetch promise is already implicitly it is using asynchronous. It is internally using asynchronous actually. So promise using asynchronous. So we are using the async manually by using AJAX call here. By using the AJAX call, we are implementing that. So this is example of dealing with data which is coming in the form of JSON. So if it is a normal text, so or a HTML, then we have to use response text directly. If it is JSON coming, then you need to use the parse, JSON parse, which is going to convert the text into JSON. Then you can handle operations on the JSON data and you can use it. So here we are using an XML HTTP request object. So to communicate with text or to JSON. Actually, another important is if you have to communicate with XML. These days, you don't need to much worry about XML, but actually, so in various other application areas, you might have encountered with XML. You need to work with XML data also. Actually, to deal with the XML data, so the response that comes in the XML format, which we need to present. So we will see a small example of how we can handle the response coming from an XML, right? From XML, how data is coming, how to manage the data. Remember, actually, all these are done usually by using general jQuery methods. But now we are doing that using JavaScript because we are learning JavaScript. So without jQuery, we must able to handle all such operations. In real-time projects, everything jQuery only, majority jQuery, and now people are implementing with React and Angular and other third parties. So now see here, let's see how to deal with an XML response, how we can handle that XML response and use that. For that, first you need some data in the format of XML. So you need some data in the format of XML, then you can easily interact. Suppose what I will do is here, I will create a simple, here I am creating a simple data file. I will add a new file as suppose the file name is data. This is like some product.xml. It is an XML file. So XML file have extension .xml, and usually how the XML document is created, because XML document is completely user defined. It is all user defined tags actually. That means you can create, so and you can configure and access here. Suppose you see it is user defined tags. To create an XML document, I'm just giving, so the basic syntax, it is question mark XML. and question mark close. So it is using some version. So version is some 1.0. Standalone version. These are all metadata of an XML document actually. So as of now, for XML syntax, this is enough. Create a simple XML file. And usually in this XML, we have root and child hierarchies. For example, how the root and child hierarchy happens. Suppose I am giving product. Product is a root. So, or suppose I am using products. Products is a root. So this is products. That is the root element. Actually, in this root element, so we have a product. So this is a product. These are all custom tags. In this product, we are defining some ID. That is the ID of that product. It is defined like this. We have product have a name. So some TV, that is the name. So we have product price, and that is the price. So we have the product price. All these are defined in that way. Usually this is the basic how we can configure the product ID, the name, and the price. So this is the XML data. Like that, you can have several products inside a products collection. So every product information is individually defined in this way. So if you can first understand how to deal with the plain data, then you can deal with very complex data and present it. So for example, that means actually we call this as root node. In that, this is the child node. So this is the root, in that this is the child, in that the child, these are the elements. These are all elements. Actually, these are all considered as XML elements. So for example, I will show a sample data here. Suppose later we can put a complex if we know the presentation here. Suppose I'm creating a root element. And in this root element, so what we are doing is, so we are writing some, so welcome to XML, some data we are defining. Okay, I want to access this XML and use it first. We will see that first. A basic one, welcome to XML, and we need to present. So let's go to the index. And here I will create another button. So I will add a button. So XML data. So on click, we will say some XML click. Okay. And we have, so this is function XML click. Okay. On this function, we need to use http.open, and this should open from /data/ we have product.xml file. We are fetching from the product XML file. Actually, this is the first method. Method is what? Get. And from which URL we are fetching that URL. Okay. And after that, http.send. Actually, yesterday we saw by default asynchronous is true. Otherwise, what you have to do is for every request at the end asynchronous, you have to set it to true. By default, asynchronous is always true. So here we need to set asynchronous as true. So here also I am setting that asynchronous as true, right? By default, it is true. Just syntactically, I am defining. So now what should happen here is, so http.onReadyState change a function. And here we need to get the data from XML. So actually, so if you want to get data from XML document, so we will create a variable XML document. So this XML document will get http.response XML. That is what actually response XML. JSON is there, then the type you just defined as the type we just configured as text. Response text is for JSON, but it should be parsed into JSON by using JSON parse. We are doing it. Now this XML document, because if response is coming in XML form, we need to use an XML document. Now in this XML document, it is a document type. It contains a lot of things inside. So actually it is an object. It is of type XML document. For example, just so for where property in XML document, I'm just logging console.log. What is it? The property. So property, I'm logging that property just to see what it is returning actually. That XML data, you see, it returns a lot of options. So this is the XML document, what it is returning. See, it is returning so many. This is the XML document it is returning. So which will have XML location, implementation, URL. It is having character set, encoding, so and version, standalone, domain. Actually, document have so many things inside. So you see, this is the XML document. XML document have a lot of methods. Remove child, replace child, all these are the general methods. So it is having so many methods. And you can see in these properties and methods, actually, this area is important for us. The parent node, parent element, child nodes, first child, last child, previous sibling, next sibling, node value, text content. These are important for us. So whenever you are dealing with an XML data, this is important to deal with XML data. Any XML document is coming, you need to understand what is the parent node. So you need to understand what is the parent element. So you need to understand the child nodes. Child nodes is an array of all the nodes which we have. We have like first child, right? We need to access that and use them. Actually, suppose these are the important options we need here. These are the options. I will copy this. This is actually, so XML document. So XML document comprises of various properties. These are the properties actually. So these are the properties. Let's clean up that others, right? These are the properties. These are the properties that returned by the XML document. Usually these properties are responsible for managing the XML document. These are the properties it is having. An XML document is having these properties. So suppose what I am doing here. So XML document dot. And I am using these properties like suppose parent node. I'm using parent node. So, and I will just use console.log. So that parent node, I'm printing that parent node. That means I am accessing and printing the parent node. And you can see it says it is empty. Parent node is empty. Means cannot read the properties of null. Why? Because actually the parent node, root nodes, we can access by using query selector only. We can access by using the query selector. Because actually this parent node is, so the node dot parent node, so it is initially empty. So we need to first define what is the parent node you are looking for. Actually the node is root, that is the root. So what I will do here, where root is equal to document dot, so this is XML document, XML document dot query selector. In XML document, you can access the name. So what is that? Root. Root is the name. We can access that root. And what we can do is, so that root have data, we can access the data and display. This root have options like first child. In the first child, there will be data. We can access the data. Suppose I am using console log. So console log, that root first child data we are accessing. And actually this have to get that welcome to XML and display. It is accessing welcome to XML and display, right? So it is accessing that XML and displaying welcome to XML, but it is showing some error saying that cannot read null of query selector and all. That's fine. Why? Because actually we are using temporarily the query selector. The query selector, which is of HTML JavaScript object, DOM object type. It is not an XML object type. It is just an JavaScript DOM object type, but still we can use it. We can access and we can fetch and display. Actually, suppose I am defining that root first data. So here we are using document. So get element by ID, get element by ID, that is container. Container inner HTML is equal to root dot first child dot data. That is the root first child data we need to access on that. It will display that welcome to HTML and it will show. That means whatever the root is there, data that you are accessing and we are displaying. So this is generally all the things usually people have to know when they are dealing with any server side technology, how to communicate with the various types of data, how we can fetch and how we can handle it. Usually this is all the important thing you need to know. So to work with different kinds of data. So that completely depends on how your server side technology sends you the data. Right here, we are not learning any server side technology, but I just given a simple overview of if data is JSON, if data is XML, if data is a response, if response is coming in various formats. So how to manage the response, that we are learning. So that is the basic thing you need to know, how the AJAX calls are made and how the AJAX calls are handled, right? Actually, this is the concept of a single page environment. Single page environment means user will stay on only one page and can get access to everything onto that page. Just for everything, you need to use an AJAX call. You need to configure the AJAX calls. You need to process the AJAX calls on that. So that is done by using JavaScript, jQuery and others. So here we are using just by JavaScript, because in reality it is, as I told you, that it is done by using jQuery. I will give this example just to make you understand how the data comes from various sources and how do we consume the data coming from various sources and presenting it. This is actually XML HTTP request. Now you can use this. So to work with fake store, NASA APIs, whatever you have learned, you can do that. But we don't directly prefer this because, so these days what we have, so we have predefined asynchronous methods. Actually, to handle AJAX calls, JavaScript calls, JavaScript uses fetch. Fetch, it is a promise actually. Fetch is a promise. By using fetch promise, it can do, because it is implicitly asynchronous. So every fetch method that you define and used, so the fetch method is by default a promise, and every promise is by default asynchronous. So that is the reason in the recent times people are not using any async method separately. Actually, you can also use async and await. So options, await keywords for creating async methods, async creating async functions. So, but modern JavaScript prefers using a promise instead of that. It prefers using a promise. It will not prefer using that here. So that means I will show you here the concept, how it is going to work, because I'll show you just an example of how async and await are also used usually, but it is all recommended to define promises and use promises. Before these promises concept, so many async and await techniques are used, but now the simple promise is enough actually. That means generally, see syntactically how these asyncs are used. Actually, async is defined by using async keyword, and we have a function and the function name. And this function have to, inside the async function, so what you have to do is you need to configure, so create a asynchronous method function, create an asynchronous function. You can set time interval, how many seconds it has to execute and all. After that, so execute using await. Using await, we need to execute. So this is the basic technique. So modern JavaScript will prefer using promise. That means instead of using this, that means this is the syntax. So without a promise. So without a promise, generally that is the syntax. But now what people are doing is with promise, you don't need to do all this. So with promise, you don't need async and await like options. Just you can create a function, and this function can actually return a promise, and it can resolve. So it is same. So these days we are not preferring the async methods or async techniques by using async keyword and await keyword. We are just going with the promises, and we are managing everything with promise. Right. So here we have the options like you see. Now we will examine this one simple concept. So how it is created actually, because in the modern JavaScript, so we prefer always defining this promises. Already I showed you all are converted into promises actually. Everything is converted into a promise. 1 second. Yep. So here you can see, so how we can define an asynchronous request and asynchronous options. For example, you see, so I will give a simple function. Let's add a simple function. Yes, this is a HTML page, right? So this is a simple one here, and we are adding this. Yeah. And we are configuring now. Let's add this and see. Now I am managing a simple method. So what we will do is a button, just button click. So on click. So is btn click. Okay, function, right? So we will just put a paragraph here, and we write a script, and so the script have a function. So that is btn click, right? So now here we define there. So we will access the functionality and manage the functionality. Now, asynchronous functions, how we can display the asynchronous functions means how to configure them and execute those functions. Usually, the asynchronous functions are created by using the keyword async. So by using async, we need to define that and we need to access. So for example, let's say, so I am creating a async, and the async function. So function name. So function name is suppose welcome. And this is having a promise. That means we will create a promise. So is equal to new promise. And usually promise contains, so we know already a callback function, it have resolve. So and it have reject. And what this have to do is this needs so some message to resolve. So resolve we will give as some welcome to JavaScript. JavaScript. So async methods, right? Yep, async. So and we need to execute this async function. So what we will do, document dot query selector, we will access the paragraph. In the paragraph inner HTML, we need to execute the function. That means what we have to do is to execute the asynchronous function and return its result. That asynchronous function and return the result. So what we have to do is, so we need to just use this promise, execute this promise, which is returning a simple string. So we need to execute this promise by using await method, await keyword. So await, and we need to execute the promise. So the that is the promise is executed. This promise is executed, which returns a string. That string is displayed here. And usually what happens is when you are executing this function, so the welcome function, that means the welcome function will be called on button click. Actually, this is a separate function. So you create that separate function. So asynchronous function, you perform this on button click, you can call it. That means you call the function, asynchronous function, that is welcome. That is the asynchronous function. Now what this asynchronous function is going to do is it is going to execute and it is going to return the functionality. Execute and return the functionality. So what we do now, I go here and let's run this separately here, refresh. Yep. So one more option. Yep. So we will see here when I click so on that button, it should get that and display. This is actually asynchronously executing a function, asynchronously managing a function. But this we are not practicing now very much because we are directly using the promises. So these days, async, await are not recommended. Also, we are just going with the promises because promise is implicitly Ajax. Promise is using implicitly Ajax. So you can directly implicitly manage with the Ajax and handle with the Ajax, right? So this is the technique we need to follow. So that's the reason we concentrated much on the point of understanding the promise. This is actually done by using async. We can create a async function which will execute and promise asynchronously. So without doing that directly, you create a promise which can resolve. And I showed you yesterday, promise uses all, promise uses all for asynchronous, and it uses race for synchronous execution. This you can try, right? But you should know that scenario, because in interviews they ask what is async await, and you need to know what is a promise, and you need to know how to make AJAX calls without fetch. Without fetch, AJAX call is done by using XML HTTP request. But we prefer, in reality, we don't directly use XML HTTP request. We prefer using the fetch, because it is a promise which is internally using AJAX technique, asynchronous techniques. So that is the reason. So you need to know all the consequences of how to handle the requests and responses. This is all you need to understand, how to handle request and response with the XML, with the JSON, with the general plain text and HTML type. Right? So once we know this, now we are aware of how AJAX calls are made. So one more concept you need to understand. I will give you an overview and introduction how JavaScript data structures will work, DS. What is JavaScript data structure, DS in JavaScript, and how these DS features are important at high level, because that is not for everybody required for dealing with data structure, but at experience level, you need to understand the JavaScript data structures. So that we will see in the next session, right? So tomorrow we will discuss about JavaScript data structures. What is data structure? What are algorithms? And how data structure and algorithm works in JavaScript. So tomorrow we will see that, right? Right.